Welcome to the At a Total Loss podcast, where real life lost moms talk about stillbirth, baby loss, grief, survival, and all things in between. I'm Catherine, a lost mom to my beautiful son Verity, who died at full term and was stillborn in January of 2022. I had no idea what to do after his death, and I thought the sadness was going to kill me. So I immediately reached out to other lost moms to try to find somebody who knew how I felt. And it was these conversations that saved me, and I hope that they can do the same for you. We talk about everything. I even interview support people and partners, people who have another perspective on what this life of loss is like. So here we are, you guys. Pull up a chair, maybe grab some tissues, shoot, maybe even a glass of wine, as we hash out what life looks like after the death of your baby and all the things that leave us at a total loss. That you are 17 months out from your beautiful baby Verity's death, and you have been super outspoken about everything, and that I am extremely grateful for that, because you were one of the first pages that I stumbled upon in the midst of my grief and trying to survive. And I know we were kind of just talking before I hit record, that survival is the mode that we have to go into. Mm-hmm. And, you're saying that you just have to tell people how to get through every day. Mm-hmm. And I have to ask you a question, though. I want to ask this. Recently, I've been seeing a lot, and I was like completely in survival mode at the very beginning, right after Brody's death, as we were just saying, like nobody was telling us anything. No, everyone was like, "Oh, your baby died. Bye." It never happens. Yeah. It's so super rare. Like, you're a very, very infrequent circumstance that's almost equated to getting struck by lightning. Get out of here. Bye. It won't happen again. And I was like, okay, now what? We are in shock. We can't process the trauma. We don't realize that our bodies don't know we don't have our child. Like, it's a strange event. So survival is almost like, how the hell do we do that? Mm-hmm. I've been seeing a lot lately that people are saying that we had no choice but to survive. Mm-hmm. What is your take on that phrase?
Mm-hmm. So I think that's usually in regard to when people say, if my child died, I couldn't survive. Like, I don't know how you do it. Right. And the response is, well, I didn't have a choice. Mm-hmm. Right. So the choice is survive or death, essentially. Right. And so I think that's what somebody's responding to. It's like, well, it's not that I can either. I'm no stronger than the next person. You think you can't, but in those instances, unless, we're going to just give up on our lives and our families and our hopes and dreams to have a family, then we don't have a choice. Our choice is to somehow figure it out, and whatever that looks like day to day, and go to therapy and, create our community and recreate ourselves. Because as you mentioned, we lose everything when we lose a child. Like, the person we were before no longer exists, especially, I think it's even, it is different. I think for those of us who lost our first child, we didn't know what it was like to be postpartum. We didn't know what to expect, so our body's doing things that we've never experienced before. And that does also happen to people who've had prior children, but you know what I'm saying? Like, we just had never been through that before. And so, I think in regard to that statement, that's what it means. It's like, we just have to figure it out, like, we're essentially going to choose to stay alive and choose to be in our lives actively. And so we have to figure it out, and so that does look different for everybody, like, survival is going to look different for everybody. I've seen some people pretty recent in their loss, and they're like, I'm going back to work and I've got to go to the store and I'm going to do these things. And for me, that was really hard for me, like, I couldn't go out in public right away. Like, so I just think it's really different for everybody. So it's hard to give like blanket advice or statements. And I don't think any of us can, because we're all so uniquely different, and we all have different support systems. And, those of us who might have prior trauma, like for me, I had already had PTSD before my daughter's death. And so it kind of re-aggravated some previous things for me, emotionally.
Absolutely.
So, I think, it's just so complex, and survival will look different for everyone. So yeah, when I have anybody, if they like reach out and they're new, recent in their loss or just kind of like stumbling, like, how do I even get through day to day? Sometimes we're like moment to moment, and it's going to
true.
change. It's going to change. Like 20 minutes, I might be like, okay, and like laughing and maybe could have something to eat. And then like 20 minutes later, I'm tanked,
That's
like,
so true. It varies through the day. Yeah.
it does. And it's so that was like something for me, definitely I had to really observe. And what I just tell people to just like really be gentle with yourself and not have expectations. Like I've said it before on like other interviews a little bit, like don't read into any one thing that you're feeling too much. Like, because I think that can set us up for like false expectation. Like if we were to say, oh, I'm feeling quote unquote better today, that must mean I'm making progress or something.
Yeah, that's dangerous.
Kind of thing. And it's like, no, like, I think this is really more of like a cyclical, maybe we're going to have just up moments and down moments and weird moments and all kinds cycle through the emotions. And that's why like the stages of grief aren't valid, right? Like there's a lot of like more recent talk in regard to processing trauma and grief that there aren't stages.
Yeah, no,
like
they're exactly.
Yeah.
And they're not linear. Everyone says that. And I never truly understood that until like, there was a day that I probably had all of them and then like repeated another one. It's the craziest thing. And on that note, someone recently who recently their child died, said to me, I just have to be careful not to have setbacks. And it's not a setback. I can't think like that.
Exactly. That's exactly what I mean, is like, that isn't an indicator of where you are at all. And I think that goes into like something I've talked about before, which is like, I don't actually align with the term healing in regard to child loss, because I think there's healing we can do in regard to the trauma, right? Like the trauma of birth trauma in regard to how this might have impacted us as a person, our self-esteem, like those kinds of things, right? There's like real specific things I think we can heal from in regard to that. But I think most of us, when we really think about it, like we're never going to like be healed from the death of our child, right? And so if we're looking at it like that and being honest about it in that way, we're never going to have setbacks. We're just going to have feelings, like, so it's not about like moving forward. Or I was listening to, actually, I just finished this book, Bittersweet by Susan Cain, and it's just a really beautiful book. And she's got a lot of information about grief and loss and all kinds of things in there that was just really wonderful. And one of the things that she says is like, yeah, you're not moving on. You're going to move forward, but you're not moving on, and that really like resonated with me for sure. And kind of in regard to that of like, so that's sometimes why I have a little like hesitancy around the term like healing. Because I think that gives other people who haven't experienced child loss almost like a thing to push on us. Like, when people say, well, I wish you healing. I'm like, well, what does that mean? I mean, maybe you just want me to feel better or something. Right. But like, no, like, unfortunately, those of us who this is our reality, we know this is going to stay with us forever. This is our story. This is our life now,
That's it.
So that's like, you're Brody's mom and he's your first baby and your story is that, and so like that's, and, same with me and Verity, like I will never have a life that I didn't lose my first child. So it's just, Oh
my God, I know. Do you ever look around going, how the shit did we get here? All the time, right?
100%. Like I'm like, even though I'm 17 months out from her death, and still some days I just wake up and look around and I'm like, I just can't fucking believe it. Like it's just, Do
you want to walk us through any of that?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think one thing that I do like to share now, being like 17 months out, is just how different, like I wrote a post a bit ago about how like kind of pay attention, like be okay that your birth story might change. Like, cause when she first died, I had this certain narrative and it was like, oh, it was no one's fault. Like nothing could have been done. These things just happen, I guess. Cause those are the things I was told, kind of just like you. It's like, this is so rare. This is so rare. It won't happen again, kind of thing. And it took me probably like 6-7 months, and then going through and like getting some testing from a fertility clinic. Like this wasn't advised to me. I just chose to do it because I was like, well, I don't really have set answers. I want to have answers, And so getting different medical information, then it was like different layers of processing and different things that I had to kind of sit with. And it really took me like almost a solid year, I think, to really grasp how I had been harmed by providers in certain ways. And I think it's because at first, when we're in shock like that, like I just couldn't cope with knowing that. My brain couldn't wrap my head around the fact that maybe I had trusted a provider who made a decision who contributed to my daughter's death.
Oh my
right?
God. Yeah, it's rough.
And so that was just too much for me. Like and I wouldn't have known that at the time, but like, so I think sharing that like about my situation, I think is important. Now, some people do get straightforward answers like right away. And so maybe it is different for them. That wasn't the case for me. And so that's just kind of like, I think something that I like to share.
So you found out after Verity's death, 6 to 7 months later, that you had underlying conditions that were undetected?
Yeah, I found out I had Hashimoto's, so I
Yeah.
should have done the thyroid medicine. Now that didn't contribute to her death. I had more of I had a mismanaged home birth. Like, and so there was like some information that like, despite that I was like super educated about all these things, that I had these in-depth birth plans and transfer plans and a doula, and like there was a nurse and a midwife assistant and all these people at my birth, I didn't know the average push time. So it was just like, it's like when my case was like typical of like what you don't know. And I actually like haven't met anybody who goes into their labor knowing how much the average push time is. So it's not like it was like on me to know that,
I didn't even know there was an average. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's like, according to ACOG, it's like considered a rest of labor after 2 to 3 hours, and so that, and it's longer for people with epidurals, and I had an unmedicated birth. So I pushed for well over 5, closer to 6.
Jesus.
So that wasn't like, I wasn't aware of that though, until like later when I was like then I had like, when I shared my birth story, I had some midwives and OBs like follow my page and actually like reach out to me and say like, I really think this is, gave me some other information. And then I ended up talking to a birth injury attorney, and we chose not to pursue any legal action, which we actually missed the statute of limitation for our state anyways. But my husband and I just made that decision that it wasn't like emotionally a good decision for us anyhow. Like it wouldn't be worth it financially anyways. And so we didn't. And, it was hard because at first I had this really loving, connected relationship with my midwives and my birth team. And then I got really angry when I started to get more information, and they were like kind of confused. And I was like, how could you mislead me in this way? Like, so.
Did they ever answer you?
I mean, so I wrote like a very long letter just recently and sent it because, I'm currently about to have my second baby. And so it was kind of important for me. Like I wanted to really say a lot. I had a lot to say to my midwives. And there was also some feedback from some other people in our community. So I did choose, I was like, before I have this second baby, like I do want to get all this out, so I did send them along, like not shaming, not like, my stance is always, I'm not here to demonize anybody, but I am going to hold you accountable, and so I don't think there was like ill intent, and I think that's the case in most situations. I don't think any, like most people have good intent, not all, right? But it doesn't mean, I've written a lot on my therapy page in regard to like intent versus impact. It doesn't matter that you had good intentions for me and that you thought everything was fine because you caused harm. There was an impact. And so that's a distinct difference that like kind of our society doesn't really realize. They're like, but I meant well. And it's like, well, it doesn't matter, like, yeah.
And I think, God bless. I mean, that's how did you feel when you put it all together? Do you wish that you had ever put it all together? Do you wish that you
I definitely
didn't know?
I really wish I would have realized this sooner, because then it would have maybe made more sense that I was so angry at first, or, but I wasn't angry at first. I was in shock, and I was just like super vulnerable and like seeking spiritual answers and just like really just soft. I was just like, just fucked up, know?
It really is a weird feeling.
Yeah. Like I like couldn't explain it. I was almost like just in like this vortex of just like wanting to have, some kind of spiritual connection with Verity and just like focusing on that. And I didn't want that to be part of my story, that like maybe there was fault, And so it was easier for me to just be like, okay, well, gosh, I guess I just have to accept that these things happen. And, and so then it just took me, kind of mentally processing a bit more and getting farther out, like my brain kind of creating some new neural pathways to be a little bit like more alert. And I wasn't, coming out of the shock fog and, that kind of things, to then be able to like really take a look at all the information.
Yeah. I have a question, because I recently found out that there may have been some, I don't know the proper word, just good intentions, but lapse in appropriate attention. It's really hard to not get super, super angry. And to live in that anger space, I think is death for us. And I try really hard not to go there. Do you find that sometimes you do go back into that anger, and like in your efforts to make change or awareness, that you may have to like step back because the anger is still kind of fresh, and you wouldn't be here if they hadn't have done what they decided to do, kind of situation? How do you wrangle that in sometimes?
100%. I mean, and I'll just share like too, like pregnancy after loss stirred tons of anger for me. For so many reasons: the physical trauma, the physical impact. Like, so when I would have any kind of, like things in the middle of the night, cramp, kind of anything, and be concerned, it would stir anger for me, because I'd be like, I wouldn't be here had my daughter not died. And then, one of the things that always kind of will get me is like the financial aspect, like going through all the fertility stuff, like going through, now like I see in MFM twice a week, like I have to pay for all those co-pays, all the lab work, all the, and like we already paid for an entire birth and all the expenses of her death and everything. So then the rage I'll just be so enraged about those things. Like,
that's the thing. Yeah.
So incredibly unfair. So like, to answer your question, I think I do take steps back sometimes, but I think it's more in a sense of like, I need to give myself space for this because it's freaking valid.
Oof,
like
so valid. No one talks about the money part. Why does no one wants to talk about it? I have like,
oh my gosh,
6-figure bills and no child. Yeah. I mean, nobody wants to talk about this.
I mean, I just can't even. Yeah, totally.
And there's no even assistance. That's a whole nother conversation, because it's like, I'm getting billed for like the mental health complimentary session they were giving me, because they were making sure I wasn't gonna, go crazy. And like, now it's like getting charged for it. I'm like, what are you guys?
Wow.
I think the resources, okay, first of all, there's definitely a problem with diagnosing women with underlying health concerns that could be a risk to stillbirth and infant death, because I found out I had a couple after the fact Brody was dead, but they didn't want to test until you have a loss.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
Okay, so that's one thing. The prevention could be there, just not there.
Yeah, right.
The care after is also not there. Right. So where does that leave us to just flail about society, screaming at people?
Yeah.
There's nothing. And it's the most unbelievable thing. And I know when lost moms get together, we just start just like bitching about the system. And a lot of us are trying to make some change. I mean, I hope that one day our voices will be amplified in order to kind of change things medically. But also, do you feel there's been a shift in the last year or so at all in the conversation, or are we still kind of just hanging out in this primitive way of being?
Do you mean like with providers?
Like providers, preventative measures, health after.
So I don't know if you saw, like I Verity's like first birthday, I did like a legacy project for her, and I took a lot of information. I polled lost parents and created a trauma-informed care sheet for medical providers. So that I was actually really blown away with how receptive people were. I got such good response from, nurses and labor and delivery units, midwives, doulas, like actually reach out and say, thank you so much for making this. I want to do better. And so it did actually give me a little bit of hope. Now, I don't know, as far as like within like the year, I think it's just hard. It's like, I think it's just probably mixed. There's people who want the information and there's people who don't want the information, as we can see on my page sometimes, where there'll be somebody, getting defensive or coming on I've seen home birth people come on my posts and really say some really inappropriate things. And they obviously don't want the information. They're defensive, right? They feel attacked by, even though I'm not attacking them, but so I do think there is a shift in some ways for those of us who are really trying to make a difference. And I've really appreciated that. I mean, I've been blown away by, the fact that there's nurses and, midwives and doulas following me to learn, like that.
That's great. Can you share that with people to pass on to their circle and things like that? Is that helpful for others?
Yep.
Okay.
So those forums I had in PDFs, and then Jillian created, lost her son Lorenzo, and she has the nonprofit Courage in Time, and she created a lactation after loss sheet that I included in there. And so like some of the things like where you're saying, where you're like, we just were thrown out to flail, right? So I'm hoping like with some of these things shared, there's obviously so much work to be done. And like, we're trying to do the best we can in our grieving and traumatized state, but that's what I've told people. I'm like, well, there's so much to be done. This is what I can do to start,
Yeah.
I mean, even just like at the fertility clinic, I mean, I don't know what your experience was at, going to clinics at all, but there was nowhere for me to talk about my stillbirth on the consent form. And I was like, this is ridiculous. This harms me. I had to like create a PDF to upload to the dang portal because it just asked these generic questions, number of children, number of pregnancies.
Oh my God,
like,
that's the absolute worst.
I'm like, how do I talk about my story? I have,
which is so important for what your current situation is. Yes.
It's literally it's literally why I'm there. And so, my fertility doctor was super receptive, and she was like, thank you so much. I'm going to give this to everybody in the office, even just like the phlebotomists have been the ones who've asked me whack questions sometimes.
Really?
So, yeah.
I don't understand it. It's just,
and I've overheard them telling people things that are just harmful. Like, oh, God's going to give you the amount of children that like, whatever, just really off platitudes and harmful stuff. Right.
Oh my God. That's like a whole thing right now. The platitudes of God, everything happens for a reason, which I was a big believer in that for like my whole life. Like, do what you do, be good, say your prayers, be grateful, good things will work out. And if it doesn't, it wasn't meant to be, that kind of shit. Absolutely not anymore. There's absolutely, that's been a really tough,
it's really
life
hard
adjustment. Yeah. To say,
we have to pull apart our own beliefs, our own narratives, our own structures. And I've had to do that a ton, and it's hard work. And so that's like, for people who are around us, like what I'm constantly like, have tried to tell like family members or friends, or like, you don't understand all these things that are happening for me. It's not just that my child died. There's a whole entire, like my identity, like unraveled, and I'm having to now like put all these pieces in all these weird places that don't fit and trying to figure it out, Have you, it's I'm sure pretty triggering to most of us, but I did finally just watch it recently. Have you seen Return to Zero? The story?
I just found out about it, the movie about stillbirth. I had no idea. Dude, I have not been able to watch it yet. Did you watch it?
Yeah, and I wouldn't even suggest for most people to watch it. The only reason I was like bringing it up is there's a scene from kind of in regard to what we're saying. She's actually she's like a therapist or life coach or something in the movie. And there's a part where she's pregnant and she's telling somebody, yes, I do believe that our thoughts create our reality kind of thing. And she's encouraging like, right. And it shows like the before, and then her client comes back after and is like, I did it. And I made my vision board and blah, 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 blah. And you can you can see what exactly we're talking about. She's having to unravel how she would give this kind of toxic advice. And then it like shows her outside beating the shit out of her vision board. And it's just like amazing. And so like,
oh, wow.
They did a pretty good job, I will say, in regard a lot to that movie. I was actually like thankful in regard to the representation in a lot of ways. Not everything is going to be perfect, right? But those kinds of aspects, I was like, yeah, that's what it looks like for us. We're literally like doing that, like breaking shit. And like
it's 100% accurate. It's 100% accurate.
I wanted to set my hypnobirthing book on fire and like threw away all my affirmations and was just like, fuck this. This was so harmful to me. Like, I was so caught up and, it's just.
So if we no longer think that good things will happen if you do this, and that things happen for a reason, and if things are meant to be, they will be, all that shit. What is your mind frame now? how do you replace all of those things?
Yeah, well, for me, so it's interesting. Like it wasn't that for me that I think as a therapist and then going through some of the traumas I'd been through, like I knew that tragedy occurred for people, but I still think there was like some cognitive dissonance of like, but if I just try to control as much as I can, and I
Control,
just do everything, and I'm a good person and good things happen to good people, right? And so, and now I'm just like, actually, it's just random. Unfortunately, tragedy can affect any of us. And I know that doesn't feel good because it's scary and that sucks, but it just is. And that's life, that none of us are exempt from illness or tragedy or trauma. And that's the human experience. You know, and I think those of us who've experienced child loss are forced to sit with that and really forced to grasp that regardless of if we want to or not, you know?
Absolutely. I mean, we do our best to take care of ourselves, but I don't think the level of intensity could be matched on how you're trying to keep that baby safe, how you're trying to keep it healthy, how you're trying to do everything you possibly can for it. And to have that essentially not create the outcome, the cause and effect doesn't make sense. That also completely demolishes any sort of thinking that results are equivalent to certain actions.
Exactly.
It's definitely not it anymore.
Just we have control and we don't.
We don't. And that's the thing. Like I thought I did. I thought I was a.
Oh, so did I.
Oh my God.
And then
showed me.
Especially like, I don't know, like if you did any like birth classes or anything like that, but I did several, and they were all like, if you do this, then this. Like it was almost like they dismissed risk and negative outcomes so much that it created a false sense of control, because it was like, okay, if I don't want to think negatively, and I'm going to just be positive about this and my birth experience and the whole thing. And it's all just super dismissive, and we cannot manifest baby death or child death or tragedy.
Yeah, it's not contagious.
No. And so it's just an avoidance. It's just an avoidance. It's literally, I mean, sure, there's at some level, it's like, okay, we want to mitigate anxiety. If we're really highly anxious, is it helpful to be just like constantly talking about all the negative outcomes that could potentially happen? Well, no. However, we need to be informed. You know, we do need, it doesn't actually help us to just not know information.
Yeah, that's the entire thing. And you had me cracking up last night, going off about people who put triggers on our information, put trigger warnings on us and our content, when all we're doing is educating about the potential risk factors that no one else is educating us about. So it's unbelievable. And I think that's a huge trigger for you. I think it's a trigger for me. There's certain, I mean, people do shitty stuff all the time. People say and do shitty things, especially not necessarily lost moms. Some of them do, but most people, and we have to pick and kind of choose which ones we're going to battle. I think somebody calling me and putting a trigger warning on me and what I'm saying is kind of a trigger. Do you think that's what, I think that's one of yours?
Oh, yeah, definitely. Because we don't have a choice. Like, wait a second, we're supposed to censor our experience for the comfort of other people. You know, like, no, that's people who actually have living, breathing children for the sake of not scaring them so that they're not stressed out that their child might die. Like, wait a second, no, we're the ones with the trauma. You know, now it was interesting because I did that poll of like asking like people's thoughts on a trigger warning, whether they felt like it was harmful or they like didn't care, kind of thing. And I got, actually, it was kind of overwhelming, a lot of messages saying, well, I thought the trigger warnings were for us as lost parents, you know, and so I do appreciate it, because sometimes I'm in a really vulnerable state and I can't read everyone's stories in those instances. And I get that. And I appreciate that. That's not kind of not what I was talking about, because I think, you know, if you're in a space, you're following my page, for example, I can't put a trigger warning on everything. So maybe you shouldn't follow and just pop in when you can, if that's the case, or kind of thing. But what I was more talking about was like, we're talking about like the average account who's not a lost account, putting a trigger warning on our story. I don't know that it actually protects the vulnerable person who's had a loss in the way that it's maybe they think they are. I think it really just stigmatizes things more. I think it just creates, so, you know, somebody's going to see that and be like, oh, okay, I'm not going to read them. I mean, that's what I think it does. Like, I don't
thus missing out on important information.
Yeah. So that's kind of, it's definitely not like black and white, but I think the majority of people, then once I started talking to people yesterday, they were like, oh, I see. Okay. Yeah, no, then I don't like it. So it was interesting. So my poll is going to be really not accurate. So I'm not even, I'm going to like have to redo it because I talked to so many people yesterday and they're like, oh, okay. I thought it was like, or they thought I was talking about trigger warnings for like pregnancy or different, which I can understand like those kinds of things. Like, so, okay, like, yes, when I announced my pregnancy, I did put a like sensitive content post because I'm on I have a loss page. I also committed to share my story honestly. And so I have to be transparent and can do that in a delicate way,
Yes. In a delicate way is a good way to put that.
Yeah. So,
and then we have to remember what the definition of a trigger warning is. I mean, I think that something that makes you mildly uncomfortable for 5 seconds is not a trigger. Yeah. A trigger will make you spiral. And I have been triggered, and triggers are super interesting things to me. I think in the very beginning, I think, the sound of a baby was like the ultimate trigger. Again, and I mentioned this earlier, like, your body doesn't know your body knows you had a baby, but it doesn't know that you don't have that baby anymore. So with the sound of a cry is like feeding time. My boobs would go crazy. My body would light on fire. So that was an absolute trigger. And I was like, I need to stay away from that. It's not cute. It was a psycho mess. So triggers though have gotten better, I would say, but I think there are still some that I just will never, I probably won't be okay with. I'm not sure. Yeah. And you kind of have to pick and choose your triggers because they're not going to go anywhere. Do you have any that you're just like, nope, deal breaker, see you later, not going to happen? Or have you learned to kind of handle them all?
Well, some of them I'm almost forced to handle just in regard to my job, but I wouldn't say that they're going to ever go away. Like I will just be honest. I don't think I'll ever be able to see a healthy home birth outcome or like a transfer. Like I've seen lately, like last week, I got really triggered. I saw my exact midwife transfer somebody and their baby lived, which was my exact situation, Oh
my God.
And so that for me, did it trigger me? Yes. Is there anything I can do about it? No. I have kind of a small community associated with me doing some of the advocacy work. Like I just happened to follow that woman. I didn't know she was having a home birth with my same midwives. Like, I don't really know her that well. We're just in the same wellness community. And so on my therapist page, not my loss page, but my therapist page, her picture popped up with her baby born. And so there's, I think there's it's unavoidable, and what we're talking about with like the actual trigger thing, like, so real life midwife, she's awesome. And she's also a lost mom, but a midwife as well. And she's the one who we were talking yesterday. And just in regard to, she was like, she's like, maybe we could put like a content this contains information about child loss, but it's not a trigger. Like it's for most people, unless they've actually had a child die. And so we're overusing that term trigger, but so like for me, there's real specific things, like I'm sure you have yours, that will always be probably very, very difficult for me, because it is so rare and there are so many successful home births. And unfortunately in my community, I'm like the only one who's had this happen. And so it just makes me feel really shunned and isolated, and it's like, well, she's that one rare incident,
Oh God. Are you done with home births?
Oh yeah. Like I could never do that again, because for me, like, I don't even know if I'll be able to have another pregnancy after, the second baby. I have no idea. I was given some, they told me I had low ovarian reserve or egg reserve when I went to the fertility clinic and lots of stuff. So I was like paranoid that we weren't even going to be able to get pregnant again. And I think, so have a scheduled C-section in just under 2 weeks right now. Mm-hmm. So like with the healing time after this cesarean, I'll be 37, like I'm about to be 35 soon. And so like, I'm like, well, I don't really know realistically what that's going to look like for me, if I'll even be up for it. Like, I don't even know if I can do this again. Like emotionally, it's been so hard. Mm-hmm. So so it's just another layer of grief, because of course I wanted this natural experience and felt super empowered. And it was also like a fear-based decision in a way, because I had some medical trauma and just didn't really feel, I never found an OB I really liked. And the midwives just made me feel so comfortable. And it was just like, okay, this works kind of thing, you know? But yeah, I could never personally, I know somebody who's had a home birth death and then chose to have a home birth again.
Really?
Great. Yeah.
Interesting. Interesting.
That's their choice. They feel it didn't have to do with the home birth. I guess that's that's what feels right for them. For me personally, that would just be too traumatizing. I can't even labor again. I just don't want to.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. I think, are you done in the sense of like even recommending it, or what's your viewpoint on it?
Yeah. I mean, I don't think, like, I'm not a medical professional. I think people need to make the decisions that they feel are best for them. I mean, it is hard. I do have some friends who still want to have home births. Even after what happened with Verity, I had people use my same midwives and have home births. And that was really hard for me. It still is, but I don't think it's my place to say what somebody should and shouldn't do. I can share my story, I can share information, and that's really all I can do, and and I'm honest with my friends about certain things. There's certain situations that my friends will have, and do they make me a little uncomfortable? Yeah, like some of their, desires or certain things. And I'll be honest and I'll say, I might not be the best person to talk to about this, because, but I'll do my best to support you and honor myself too. I had to kind of tell a friend yesterday, I don't think I can have this conversation with you. I think you just need to talk to your doctor. And, so I don't give any kind of advice. I'm not anti home birth. I'm not pro home birth. I'm not pro anti anything, but I am pro well-rounded evidence-based information and trauma-informed care, which would include taking into consideration everybody's unique experience. Yeah. So that's what I like, just hard press in that regard. Like, I've had people say like, well, you're just fear mongering and you only are against home birth because your baby died, kind of thing. And I'm like, no, actually, that's not the case. Although it would make total sense, and I have every right to feel that way if that was the case.
Absolutely. And you had a front row seat to the risk factors that nobody talks about, and that the trauma risks, like, you were there, you experienced it when they try to act like it's such a rare occasion. Can you shed a little light on home birth and what the risks are? I am not, will honestly say, I never had time to really educate myself on it, because I wanted it as an option, but I didn't know anybody who had done it. So I just did the easier route. So can you shed some light on the facts behind it?
Sure. Yeah, I'll do my best. I don't know that I'm like the greatest in regard to like sharing all the statistics and stuff, but I'll definitely do my best. Like, the reason I chose home birth was I had, like, I kind of, prefaced a little bit, I had just like some medical trauma, and I was like, I don't know, like, I'd heard so many birth trauma stories about being in the hospital, and I'd heard like interventions are overused, and I'd heard like, they're really will press you to get induced and all these other things. And I kind of wanted like my body to just do what it was going to do. And I just didn't want to mess with the baby and that whole thing. And I had actually, so in my early 20s, had gone to massage school, and I've kind of always been sort of in like the wellness kind of holistic community a little bit, even as I became a therapist. And I'd had a lot of people I'd known have home births, and it, like, for me, the worst case scenario, which it was told to me, was, okay, if something goes wrong, you'll get transferred and have an emergency cesarean. Like, that was like the worst case outcome that was ever presented to me. Now, I know now, the thing is that although it can, when it goes right, it can go right, and it can be great because you're at home and you don't have to deal with a lot of other things that you might have to deal with in the hospital, and you get to just go right into your bed and you're in your safe environment, and the baby doesn't have to be messed with, and like the sterile environment kind of thing. Like, that was like kind of the perks, right? Now, the downside is that what they don't say is that when something goes wrong, as it can, it's twice as likely to be fatal for mom or baby. And so that's the statistics. Like, that's it. It's like, when you look at that's what ACOG says. Like, I'm not a researcher. I'm just going off of the information. Okay. So granted, is it sometimes safer, especially for people of color, to birth at home? Yeah, statistically, actually it is, because there's a lot of medical negligence and harm for people of color in the hospital, in our system. There's research that shows that. Now, so I can understand why people make that decision to birth at home. And there's all kinds of other reasons why people might choose to do that. But the reality is we don't have access then to quick neonatal care, right? Like the baby, the resuscitation, and for the baby to get straight to the NICU, like minutes can make a difference for that baby and their life. And so that's what happened for us, you know? So, yeah, I mean, I don't know if I answered your question, but that's kind of.
Yeah, no, that's great. Cause I have been in touch with some that have had horrific home birth experiences that led to the death of the child. And it's not my experience. So my experience is different. And I can only speak from my experiences. So I like to get the information out there, especially if anybody is unaware of what the home births are like, what the risks are. And I think our point is, again, I will most likely, God willing, if I have another baby, go to the hospital again. But I just want risk factors to be just as important and just as vocalized as potential good outcomes.
Yes.
That's what drives me nuts. When people are so confident, by people, medical providers or midwives, doctors, whatever, are so confident that the outcome is going to go a certain way, in a good way, in a positive way, if all of these things look good, and if this is what we do, and they don't ever, ever say that there is an increase in death for home birth, or there's an increase in death if a stillbirth. Like I'm really sick and tired of them they're so afraid they're going to cause fear. And I'm tired of that. And it's bothering me. And I have men message me all the time, like, I never even heard of this. What is this? I'm 32 weeks, blah, 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 blah. I'm like, start asking some freaking questions then, because you need to know this stuff. To say to us, congratulations, you're 30 weeks, you're in the clear. If you did give birth now, the baby will most likely, that's not a thing. It's not a thing. My baby died out of nowhere. And all things that could have been prevented. So I think our point is, we don't want to scare anybody into saying, you should not do this. Oh my God, you should not do home birth. Oh my God, you should not go to the hospital. Because your reasons for doing home birth were exactly mine. Exactly mine. I didn't want anybody interfering or intervening. I didn't want to I didn't want some crazy opinions. I didn't want to be on someone's watch to just cut me open if they had to go somewhere else. I just didn't want that to happen, because that was my perception. But honestly, I think what we're trying to say is understand the risk factors and make an educated decision on what is best for you, so that in a situation where something's going south, you are not trying to wrap your brain around the possibility of it, that you're understanding that this is happening. You need to be aware and awake and understand what the options are for you if this were to happen.
Right. And that's, I think, what's, because like I even had my midwife telling me when I was struggling, but you made informed decisions. And at the time, I just remember being like, yeah, okay, I guess. But then looking back, once later on, I was like, no, I didn't make informed decisions because I didn't have all the information. I had information fed to me in an echo chamber that was biased. And I've had to, when we were talking about like unraveling the layers of things, like that's work I've had to do to own that. Although I read these 10 birth books and I attended these 3 birthing classes, they were all feeding a narrative. And I had to own that. I had to just see, like, even me as a mental health professional who understands manipulation and how our brain works, didn't catch that, and that doesn't mean I'm not smart. That doesn't mean I didn't make the best decisions for my baby. It's just, I fell victim to part of the system. I was vulnerable and I believed my care providers, and I trusted them when they told me certain information, and I went with that. And so, it's not that, I'm for or against, or it's like, but we need to really actually take a look at what making an informed decision is. We can't just say, I'm only going to take this information from this certain area over here and not look at the whole situation as a whole.
Do you think that in the first initial stages of pregnancy, when you like go in for like, 7-week viability check or 10-week or whatever it is, that they do say, hey, there's a probability of this and there's a probability of that, and there's a chance that this could happen? And you don't think they should say that?
Oh, I think they should say certain things. They don't say those things.
No, they don't.
And I mean, I know like several like lost moms who had full-term stillbirths at 38, 39 weeks. And I asked them like, well, your experience with an OB, like, did they talk to you about stillbirth? And they were like, they mentioned it one time, was saying, oh, the chance of stillbirth increases at this, so this is when we'll induce you. But to somebody who's never had a baby before, doesn't even know what stillbirth is. And so if you're not actually going in to educate them on, hey, this is why this is important. And let's talk about this. And this is what this means. It's like a quick, like we just gloss right over it. Right. And that's kind of what I experienced even with my birth education courses. Like, people would ask other students in the class would be like, well, what about, the cord wrapped around the neck? And it would just be like, oh, the Wharton's jelly will protect them. And that happens all the time. And it's not, like super dismissive. And I've been talk about misinformation and stuff, like when I've seen like midwifery posts about like,
oh yeah, you were ripping someone right before this. Is awesome.
Like say like a knot in the cord, right? And so then they're posting this video of how magical the body is and how it's just designed to do what it's supposed to do. And look at these cool knots and how freaking triggering that is for people whose baby has died from a same knot, just like that. And so if you're not actually warning people that like, hey, this is actually miraculous that this baby's alive because this knot could have killed them, and you're not giving that information, you're instead feeding the narrative of look how wonderful it is and you'll be fine and that kind of thing. It's just
dangerous.
Gross.
It's gross. Yeah. It's disgusting. I appreciate you calling people out for that. I mean, we all have a mission here. We all kind of feel like we, have to share information that we've learned. And when you stumble upon somebody who's just completely, I understand the positive spin. I understand like chilling people, but you have to include the other stuff too. You have to, include, if you're going to do that, you have to include the dark stuff too, the chances of bad. And they don't want to do that. They don't want to own up to that. It's like I can't figure it out. And I think it's just a testament to how society even just wants to turn away from all of this.
It's definitely our culture. Like we, same goes for grief and death. Like we're very uncomfortable with the topics, right? Like very grief illiterate. And I think it feeds into that. And sort of maybe toxic positivity is a little hand in there too, just kind of all of it. And so, like I really had to take a step back. I really was like sometimes going on those accounts and trying to like, talk some sense into people. And I wouldn't be rude at all. I would just say, hey, like, well, this happened to me. Like, here's my thoughts. And like, I really think you should share XYZ to inform people. And I mean, I've just been torn apart by these people who are midwives and doulas sometimes. And so I just had to be like, you know what? They have no compassion. They don't care. They just get defensive. I mean, even some of my own providers, my own hypnobirthing provider was super defensive, and a really disappointing experience for me of sharing some feedback to her. And so I've just had to kind of decide when I'm going to share information, I'm just going to share with people who want to learn. And unless there's like with the instance that you saw on my story this morning, where a lost mom came to me and she was super gaslit by this doula. And I got really kind of like mama bear come out for my friend kind of thing,
Absolutely.
Like, no, like you're not going to gaslight this person who's vulnerable, sharing with you how they were harmed by you. So I will then call you out.
Yes, you get them. I mean, sometimes we can't help it. I mean, there's just certain things, like I said this earlier, there's just certain things that I don't even want to call it. Maybe it is a trigger, because instead of me spiraling in an emotional shame, it's more like, I'm mad. I don't want to let this go. I can't let this go. This would be a disservice if I let this go.
And I think it depends on like all of our unique values. Mm-hmm. Like one of my highest value is accountability as a person. So, so then when somebody fucks with something and is doing something unjust, I'm like enraged, right? Like it actually gets at my core values. And so that, and justice, like injustice just riles me up. And I mean, as a therapist too, like I have a responsibility to do what I can where I can in some ways, that's like an ethical thing for me. And so even sometimes where I'm like, oh, I really don't want to get into this, but it's like, it's harmful. I can't stay quiet, like I went through that, with other things in my life as well. This isn't the first time I've experienced this with misinformation. So
it probably won't be the end. It won't be the last.
No way. As long as there's humanity, we're going to be kind of feeling.
Well, then what's your coping? How's your coping mechanism? I mean, you're pregnant now. So there goes like wine and stuff. And like, so like, how do you cope? Like, give us some tips.
Oh gosh, honestly, like lately people have been asking like, how are you doing? And I'm like, honestly, I'm super disassociated. That's my main, like, I'm super disassociated. I am just like eating ice cream and just like trying, I mean, like, I'm just really, my page is kind of like a hobby for me. Like I've really been so thankful that I have like people to connect with on my page, and because I'm like isolated in my house as well, because we're like super on lockdown right now to not get COVID or anything, you know? So before we go in for, you know, to have the baby. So I'm just like, okay, my page, talking with people, like my little advocacy things have been a coping for me. It's a way that I can honor Verity, that I can do something that feel like her death isn't just in vain. Like, and that is coping for me, you know, and not, I have written posts about how like, you don't need to do anything with your tragedy. Okay. And I do really feel very strongly with that. Just because I might be doing something doesn't mean that you need to, or that that's right for your life. Right.
Right. Right.
That's just what works for me right now. You know, like we don't have to do anything with our tragedy. It can stay this tragedy, and we don't have to make beauty of it. We don't have to turn it into something. We don't have to make purpose of it. It's a fucked up scenario that never should have happened. And for me, though, it has been helpful to be in some advocacy roles in some regard as a therapist, to talk about things, to shed some light on things, to make my trauma-informed care sheets. So yeah, like right now, really, I'm just like trying to get rest when I can, because it's so uncomfortable, right? Like at the end of pregnancy, it's just really uncomfortable. And pregnancy after loss is even worse. So, and I'm kind of, you know, my pregnancies were about 9 months apart. So my body is wrecked, you know, just grief, trauma, like all the things. And so right now I'm really just like almost kind of back at square one in regard to survival, to be honest. So
because this is another phase. It's 100%.
Yeah, I'm like, drink your water, take your supplements, try and eat something, try and sleep when you can. Like it's like the very basics. Yeah.
No, well, that's why I think it's so helpful to hear you talk about it, because again, you know, we're circling back to everyone thinking that it's so linear. Like if I can get to just month number 3 and then month number 6 and then a year, and then no, there's just going to be waves and phases, and we're never going to be done in different layers. And so I think this community of us is really kind of the only way to really just take it minute by minute, hour by hour, day by day. And I'm thankful for the community, and I'm thankful that you are willing to share your story with so many of us and be so open and honest about it. And we're all still so flawed. I mean, just because we've had like, I'm not proud of some of my reactions to things.
No, me either. Oh my gosh.
Oh my God. I'm trying to be good here, but this is how it is.
Listen, we're human beings, and this is messy as fuck. So it's like,
so messy.
I mean, things just shattered everywhere. Like that's the thing that I struggled with, was just like, if there was expectations from family members or friends, or I'm like, you don't understand, like I'm not well, so I'm doing my best, but I'm gonna like, yeah, maybe fly off the handle on something, or maybe my, you know, reaction isn't going to be super graceful about some things, and I need you to have grace for me about it. You know, and
it's important.
And that's the people who were around at my year mark when I like stood up and looked around, like I was like, thank you. Because a lot of times they did have a lot of grace for me in some regard, and I wasn't well. And sometimes I didn't even know I wasn't well, you know?
It's a good way to put it. It is a feeling of unwell. And I think I was talking about this last night. I sometimes don't know what my brain is actually doing. And we talked about, yes, we're sad. Yes, we're crying. Yes, we miss our babies tremendously. But no one really tells you that there's a science behind the grief, that the trauma of it all does have effect on your brain capacity, your level of concentration, the fog. I mean, I do things and I don't remember doing them. It's terrifying. I was like, was I hammered, drunk?
Oh, I know.
I am stone cold sober.
You know, the reason I named my page Traveling with Grief is because my husband and I did a 4-week road trip after she died. Cause I was like, well, I'm on maternity leave. I'm like, we were planning to have our baby. What do we do with ourselves? And so I was like, okay, well, I'm going to make this page Traveling with Grief, because we're traveling with our grief. I'm not even kidding you, Catherine. I don't remember where we went. Some of the things I'm like, when people are like, where'd you go? And I'm like, I don't actually remember.
Shit.
You know, like
do it again. Yeah. It's so real. It's so real.
Yeah.
It's a thing.
There's just so many. And I had to tell one of my friends one time, she was like, kind of, we're not friends anymore, unfortunately.
I'm sorry. It happens. Oh,
it happens. God. It so happens. I try to warn people, like, just brace yourself. There's going to be some stuff, but she was like kind of really hard pressing me about like, yep, that's grief and blah, 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 blah. And here's what you need to do kind of thing. And
Was she
kind
a
of talk with
therapist?
positivity. No. And so I got like really like, I had to just sit and be like, I get what you're saying. I was like, but you're not taking into consideration, like, it's not just grief for me. I was like, I'm postpartum. This is probably when I was like a month, I was like 2 months out. Right. So I'm like 6-7 weeks postpartum. And I was like, and I'm traumatized. I was like, this isn't just me grieving the death of somebody and grieving the death of a child. I don't care what anybody says. There is a significant difference between grieving the death of a child, especially right after birth, when we're postpartum and our brain is different anyways, than another family member. It doesn't dismiss anybody's experience with their other family member, but out of order death, when there's a death of a child, is different. It has different unique characteristics and ways that it's going to impact our life. Right. Like we have, especially for those of us who had full term, losses. I mean, I had things in every single room ready for my baby, so it's not just, we lost an entire future, not just this person, so having to tell people that, and then they like forget that we're like postpartum. I'm like, I was still bleeding at that point. Like, and you're trying to tell me to like get out and go have fun, like get lost.
GTFO immediately. That is so true. And it just keeps going, like clumps of hair coming out. You're
my
like,
gosh, I thought I was dying at 3 months. I was like, why is my hair coming out now? It's like, nobody told me that. Like,
and no one checks in about the postpartum. They just don't even want to go there. And not to mention our bodies are our own personal hell.
Gosh. Yeah,
it is a lot. And we only talk about these things because we see each other. We recognize this in each other. And we want to, and anybody who listens, who has not experienced this personally, most likely has experience knowing somebody going through this. And the more information they know about this, the better they can handle it and make it better for their loved one, because this is a life that none of us signed up for, but we're in it now. We're trying to make it work the best that we can when we don't want to. And that is the biggest mind fuck you've ever seen in your life. So these conversations, I swear, I'm just on them all day long. And they're so helpful.
Yeah.
I honestly, you have so much knowledge in so many different areas, and I appreciate you sharing in all of those little departments. But if you could just say one thing, like right now, a message to anybody going through this, what you would want them to know?
I think really, really importantly is have a lot of compassion and grace for yourself with wherever you're at, moment to moment. Don't let anybody force you to do anything that doesn't feel good for you. Be unapologetic about where you're at with your grief, with your processing, with your trauma, with what feels right for you. If somebody's trying to get you to go out to dinner and you don't want to go, like, like honor where you're at, like, or if you need to go, great. Like, don't let people kind of give you unsolicited advice, especially people who've never been in your situation. Okay.
So
like,
good.
I mean, but anybody, I don't care who it is, like, just you do what feels good for you. And I know that can be hard sometimes, because what I've had people tell me in response to that is, well, but then there's maybe backlash from family, or they take it personally, or, they don't understand why I don't want to go to a family gathering or something like that. And I do get that is difficult and it sucks. But I just want to encourage, like, to try and honor where you're at the best that you possibly can, because it matters. You're the one having to live it. You're the one having to be in your body, to process your story and tragedy and loss of your child. So I think that's really the main thing, is just really try to have compassion and no expectations of yourself. Yeah.
That's so good. That's so good, Erica. I mean, people need to hear that if they want to do something good for themselves, you can't feel guilty. And if you want to grieve, you can't explain yourself. And that's such great advice.
You don't owe anybody
so wonderful.
Anything. Yeah. You don't owe anybody anything. And that's just, I think, really important, especially for maybe those of us who are overachievers or people pleasers or different things like that.
Oh God, that's a whole nother episode. You'll come back, right? Let's do this again.
I'm down. Let's do it.
Dude, I like, this is us. Like,
well,
here we
I
are.
just want to, really thank you for making, like I said, you don't have to do these things, but you're doing it. And I appreciate you having your podcast and creating a platform for us to share and honor our babies. And it's hard. So I just appreciate you holding space for, all of us. So too, with your podcast.
Thank you. Whew, good stuff. So I hope you guys got something out of that episode, and it's so important that we all talk about this and stay very open about what's going on in the life of loss. So make sure you like, share, and hit subscribe so you get notified when another video drops. And also make sure that you stick around, because coming right up, I'm going to break down the episode and go into detail about what we talked about. So I hope to see you guys over there.